Everything look all right?
That's good.
Has everybody reviewed the summary of actions? Do we have a motion? We have a motion to approve, and
So
Roseanne
moved.
Nieto,
A motion to approve.
Second.
and a second from Mr. McDermott. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions?
I'm going to pull up the calendar real quick because November, December is out of pattern.
Okay. Can we have everybody take a look at the calendar, the upcoming calendar? Any comments, questions?
The reason I suggested that is we do not meet in November, and in December, we meet the second Wednesday instead of the fourth Wednesday to kind of get around both Thanksgiving and Christmas.
And I didn't see anything on the schedule for any new, anything that we would need to vote on. So are we going to have some way cool stuff?
I'll just, Matt Kelly with CCTA. I'll just start off our presentations tonight. As you know, we're not in checklist season yet. We'll have the draft checklist for next year come to you at our next meeting. But until then, we thought we'd let you guys see what's going on in the world of transportation planning in Contra Costa County. And we're now kind of looking at transportation from a corridor-based perspective. So we've got several major freeway corridors, travel corridors in the county. And tonight we're going to look at two recent and ongoing efforts to improve two of these major corridors, the I-80 or West County corridor and the Central County I-680 corridor. So we're going to start off with the West, and we have Leah Greenblatt here. She's from WCTAC, which is the West Contra Costa Transportation Advisory Committee. And they represent the 5 cities in the county over there in West County. And our West County, we finally have a West County rep here on the CAC, but I don't see her here tonight. So this will be information for the rest of the county for you guys to learn what's going on in West County. And then we've also got Tim Hale, who is our new Deputy Director, Executive Director of Projects here at the Authority. He came on, about 4 months ago? May. Wow, time flies. So Tim is going to present the I-680 corridor program of projects, otherwise known as Innovate 680. So we'll start with Leah and then move east. So, Leah.
I'm going to advance some slides, so I'm going to sit over here.
Can I interrupt you for a second? I forgot. I'm supposed to tell folks that the downstairs restrooms are closed. You have to go upstairs. And to leave, when you go out, you have to go out through the staffed parking kiosk. So make sure that you do that. It's pretty obvious.
Good evening. I'm Leah Greenblatt. I'm a project manager at what we call WCTAC, the West Contra Costa Transportation Advisory Committee. I was the manager on the study that I'm going to share with you tonight. And WCTAC, as you may know, is one of 4 of CCTA's regional transportation planning committees, but we're a little bit different than some of the other RTPCs in that we're a joint powers authority, and we also include transit providers. So on our board is also representatives from WestCat, AC Transit, and BART. So this evening, I wanted to give you an update on what's going on in West County and share with you what we learned during the study process and get everybody's, get all these West County projects on everyone's radar. So this was a 18-month study. It was jointly funded by WCTAC, CCTA, MTC, and BART. And it was called our West Contra Costa High Capacity Transit Study. But just to get everyone on the same page, I wanted just to briefly say or describe what, for our study's purposes, what is high capacity transit. And what we mean in this context is that it provides substantially higher levels of passenger capacity with fewer stops and higher speeds. So you might think of it as the service that often serves commuters, but it can be, it can occur in hours greater than just peak commute times. So this slide is just a quick depiction and an overview of our study process. What lies behind this slide, after, if you go under the assessments and the development of alternatives and the final alternatives, are 19 very detailed technical memos. So this evening you're getting the highlight of the highlight. But if you are interested in finding out any more about the study, it's available on the WCTAC website. So I'm going to start out with a little background information for you. Congestion on I-80 is not a new problem. It's been going on since at least the early 2000s that MTC has usually ranked it as its number 1 or number 2 most congested freeway in the Bay Area. In Contra Costa County, it's really the regular grind. While we know 680 and Highway 4 are bad, this is consistently year after year throughout the day a congested freeway. With I-80, there's no opportunity for significant widening. So it takes a multi-pronged approach in order to make any changes in trying to increase the throughput on the corridor. So, we've been working with Caltrans on some integrated mobility, integrated corridor management programs. They implemented ramp metering. There's a lot of new signage, electronic feedback signage that's on the corridor. We're working with MTC and Caltrans and the CHP on trying to improve the mobility within the HOV lanes. And then this is another approach that we took. It's kind of our third prong in trying to improve the corridor, and that is to do a high-capacity transit study that looks at what long-term improvements could be done to increase transit usage. So the average speed in this corridor is, if you're going in the peak direction, it can be quite low. It's an older study that was done when they before they were implementing the I-80 Corridor System Management Plan, found the speeds that are on the left. But what we've also found is that they're not going to be getting better probably anytime in the near term. And so there's between 8 and 53% decrease in the speeds projected by year 2035. So what we also did is look at, what the market is for transit. So we looked at some projections for AC Transit's growth, BART's ridership growth, and WestCat's, and it shows, our modeling shows that there's a significant potential for increased ridership. We also did something that's called a Transit Suitability Index, where it looks at a whole number of different factors that contribute to transit utilization, and looked at what the conditions are today, or at the time our study started in 2015, and what they might be like in 2040. And the darker the blue, the better the suitability is for using transit. One thing that I want to point out with this or these maps is that if you look at 2015, the areas that are dark blue in the south that have high capacity transit now, they're pretty well served by Express Bus and BART. That similar color range occurs in 2040 in the north, and it's already starting to occur in the 2015 picture. So even in the near term, there's a strong market potential for increased transit. So initially, after we did our research, we looked into 8 different alternatives, and they went through a preliminary evaluation. Later on, I'll go through the alternatives and what we concluded with, but I wanted to take a minute right now to go over the alternatives that we didn't advance. One of these alternatives, alternative 5 up there, is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe commuter rail. And we look right now, the Capital Corridor and Amtrak runs on the Union Pacific Railroad right-of-way, which is the one that follows the coast. There's another major rail corridor that's a little bit more inland that's known as the BNSF. So we did some preliminary looking into this as an alternative route. What we noticed at this time is that as opposed to the peninsula where you have the Caltrain that kind of goes through the heart of a lot of these little cities, and it has a lot of housing nearby, and there's a long history of development around the Caltrain stations. The railroad lines in West County are more industrial based. Historically they've served freight and industry and haven't served as commuter lines historically. So what that means is there's no passenger supporting infrastructure now. There's no stations, there's no parking lots, there's no sometimes limited roadway access even. So while the UP line may become less desirable over time because of issues like rising tides, at this point we didn't pursue this option because we really think it's an issue for Capital Corridor to decide on how it wants to do its operations, if it wants to shift over to the more inland route. And that's something that they're considering in the near term. So the other thing that, the other alternatives that we looked at have to do with extending BART. And we looked at 2 options for extending BART, 2 primary routes. One extension going through or extending north from the Richmond station, and another extending north from the El Cerrito Del Norte station. And within the Del Norte option, we had 2 sub alternatives. One where we looked at what they call DMU, the diesel motorized units. That's the type of technology that's being used for BART's East County extension. So we did look into that initially here. What we found is the terrain is so different between the East County situation and what we have in West County that we would have to build a lot of tunnels and structures, whether we use DMU or if we use traditional BART technology, and there wasn't as much of a significant cost savings if we pursued the DMU. So at a fairly early stage, that alternative was set aside. And then later on in my presentation, I'm going to go through and give you the trade-offs of how we came to the recommendation to support the BART extension from Richmond. But first, we're going to talk about an alternative that's actually pretty actively being pursued in implementation right now. So ExpressBus. The study looked at 3 areas of ExpressBus service. I mentioned before, WestCat and AC Transit are our partners, but we also looked at what new service may be offered by one or both of those agencies might do. And we found that there's demand for ExpressBus now, and that demand will continue to grow over the next 25 years. And by 2020, if we implemented the early phases of the ExpressBus recommendations, we'd see a service increase of 39%. And then if we continued that implementation, the demand for service would grow another 37%. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the type of service that this was looking at. So one, we know from AC Transit and WestCat's own data now that from West County, there's an oversubscription, I'd say, of for the ExpressBus service that goes into San Francisco. There's standing room only sometimes on the WestCat buses that go into the city, and WestCat receives a lot of requests for, adding additional buses, extending their schedule. So one thing that our study recommended was additional expanded service into San Francisco, and that service might not be focused on the traditional destination point. Right now a lot of them are going into the Transbay terminal, but there might be other areas that this ExpressBus service could serve. The other interesting finding from our study is when we did our travel market analysis and our modeling, we found that there's a lot of demand for service between West County and Berkeley, West Berkeley, downtown Berkeley, Emeryville, and downtown Oakland / Jack London Square area. Right now, if you wanted to take transit for that trip, it would be what we call a 3-seat ride, where you'd have to get on WestCat, then you'd have to get on BART, and then you might have to get on AC Transit, because there's no high-capacity transit service currently filling that niche. So that is something that that our board, the WCTEC board, was very interested in. The other thing we looked at in terms of ExpressBus is different freeway improvements that could be made to get the buses moving as quickly as possible. So one of them, we have several recommendations for what's called direct access ramps onto I-80, and in this case at the Richmond Parkway. There's the transit center there. There is a direct access ramp on one side, the south side of the interchange, where it's highlighted in yellow. We're proposing one on the northern end. And what that does is it allows the buses to get on and off the freeways without having to scoot on over to the on and off ramp. So that saves a lot of time. And then also we looked at reconfiguring the park and ride portion of the transit center to increase capacity. And so we looked at some structured parking options. Then in Hercules, another example of where the service would come in, but the current roadway structure with the on and off ramps really adds a lot of time to the express bus service. And the city of Hercules feels that the current interchange at Highway 80 and State Route 4 is obsolete, so they're interested in reconfiguring that ramp. So we worked with them to come up, or that interchange, I should say. We worked with them to develop an alternative routing that would speed up the express buses and serve their development needs. So I'm going to just very quickly go over what it would take to advance this particular alternative. There's a lot to be done with just enhancing the existing Transbase service. We're in the process of engaging MTC and Caltrans to raise the profile of the demand for this type of service, and get on all the lists for getting plans done and getting funding. We just recently applied for a grant to try to do service planning to provide the express bus service to Alameda County. And the project is potentially eligible for funding should RM3 pass. So that's kind of exciting. There's a lot more studies that need to be done for all of these, and there's even interest in potentially increased transit service from Solano County. And, with the freeway on and off ramps, the parking lots, the whole, I'll say kit and caboodle, the estimated capital cost is $245 million for this. So bus rapid transit, I don't know how familiar people are with that term, but just again, so we all know about it. It's AC Transit is currently implementing it in Oakland right now, and there are some other areas where it's in the planning stage and will likely soon be implemented. Many versions of it, of bus rapid transit and what it can look like on the ground, but it's simplest to think of it like a light rail system that is using a bus instead of a trolley or a streetcar. So for our particular study, we looked at a range of BRT, bus rapid transit improvements, because we know that each city differs, and we needed to be flexible and be able to customize the approach, because some areas, there's right-of-way issues, some areas there's, that transit suitability index really supports higher capacity transit. In other areas, it's not ripe yet for something like BRT. So we looked at a couple of different versions of it, but first we'd probably start with extending the line 72 up further north, and we would add on these different options as the service needed to be fully implemented. Yes. There's a lot of different strands of 72, so it depends which one, but the 72R does. So we looked at BRT on San Pablo Avenue and McDonald Avenue, and right now our study ended in May, but we've already partnered with the Alameda Transportation Commission to do a study of this BRT segment all along San Pablo Avenue, starting in Oakland and going north. So we'll be looking at items like queue jumps and signals and priority, priority signals. One thing that it made it to our final alternative, the McDonald BRT, but we want to look at that and evaluate that further to determine if we should be pursuing the BRT along McDonald. It's a much narrower right-of-way than San Pablo, and it might not be as good a fit. The transit time benefits didn't seem as great on that segment, so we might look at something else there. So there's vehicles that need to be purchased. There's expanded real-time information that would be incorporated. There's these queue jumps and signal priority improvements, all that that we estimate the capital costs to be $243 million.
What's a queue jump?
Oh, I'm sorry. So, good question. So, let's say you're approaching an intersection, and it's maybe a 2-lane intersection, and the vehicles are all backed up waiting for the traffic signal to go from red to green. Instead of having your bus stuck way in the back, you can kind of try to slip them in on the side so that they get to be the head of the line, essentially. And so it's a way of getting them through congested areas faster. Okay, so another location where we looked at bus rapid transit was on 23rd Street. And this project would link Hercules, Hilltop, Contra Costa College, San Pablo, Richmond BART, and new ferry service that's going to be coming to Richmond. When we started this project, or the study, the University of California was still considering developing its global campus. And since that time, they haven't, but we still recognize that there's development potential at the Richmond Field Station. So we looked at how we could incorporate service to feed, both the ferry terminal, the new ferry terminal that begins operation next year, and whatever future development might occur at the Richmond Field Station. So in the short term, the BRT improvements would probably focus on Fort Point, where the ferry terminal is, again, the signal priority, real-time information, and queue jumps. And the estimated cost of this bus rapid transit improvement is $179 million. So I was talking earlier about the Union Pacific service. There's a Capital Corridor and San Joaquin service, and the Coast Starlight that currently goes along the western edge of Contra Costa County. So, when you're dealing with rail providers, and in this case, such a long service, because, the Amtrak service is quite extensive in terms of crossing the country, it really requires regional cooperation to expand. So this is an ongoing project that began before our study. The city of Hercules has really taken the lead in implementing the development of the Hercules Regional Intermodal Transit Center at Hercules. And so this alternative looks at completing that project, and the estimated capital cost for that is, I should say, the remaining costs are $69 million. So like I mentioned before, there's BART extensions that we looked at. And we looked at 3 different routes. The bigger orange route is what we call Alternative 6. It's the alternative that leaves from the Richmond BART station. And then we looked at Alternative 7A, which is leaving from Del Norte using traditional BART technology. And then Alternative 7B, which is same routing, but it's using the diesel motorized units.
Was there a
So
reason,
when-
excuse me, was there a reason you didn't look at DMU extension out of Richmond?
Well, pretty early on, originally we had 2, we didn't have 7A and 7B. So 7B gave us the option to look at it was going to be DMU or traditional BART. And pretty early on, we discovered that the DMU didn't work so well in this corridor. So they wanted to still continue to look at what it would take to use traditional BART technology.
Was that due to expected ridership volumes?
That's
You need a higher capacity train?
Yeah, that's part of it. The DMUs have lower capacity, and right now the Del Norte station is near capacity, and they couldn't. That type of train couldn't accommodate the volume. But really what the determining factor was is it kind of came down to engineering, and that the topography in this area is up and down and up and down, and there'd be so much tunneling and elevated track that the engineering that's required wouldn't be that much different between the DMU and the traditional BART. And given the capacity limitations, we went with the traditional BART technology. But, it depends on the corridor. Like in East County, it's relatively flat. There's other areas where you're not dealing with those same types of issues. So I'm going to just do a quick run through of why we ended up with the option that we did. So we looked at the potential for stations, not that in any way are we looking at, on Alternative 6 of having that many stations, but we looked at what potential stations could be. And we looked at the length of track, because that would affect the cost. So from the Richmond station to Hercules is 8 miles, and it's 7.5 miles if you go from Del Norte. One of the things with the Del Norte extension is you have to, whether it's DMU or traditional BART technology, you have to get to the Richmond station because that's where the maintenance yard is. So for DMU, you have to still build to Richmond if you went with that technology. So we also compared travel time, and the route through Richmond is a little bit longer in terms of time. We also looked at transit centers and destinations, thinking that Hilltop, using Hilltop as an example, that would be a popular destination. If you went with the Richmond routing, you could potentially have a station at Hilltop. With the other routing, you can't get to Hilltop via BART, so you'd need to transfer and take a bus or some alternative.
I saw in one of the previous slides a spot for the community college.
Mm-hmm.
With all 7A, they would have to take a bus.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the issues is.
So how close? Yeah, they're Contra Costa College. So with 6, how close is that to the college? Right on it?
Hold on. And I can show you. I've got a map I can show you of that, but it is pretty close. We didn't get down to, a detailed design level. We worked schematically, but it's somewhere on the, I'd say between San Pablo Avenue and the college, around there.
But it's
depending on-
walking distance. at
Oh,
that
yes.
point. So
Yeah,
my-
that's why the alternative 6 was appealing to our board particularly. They really wanted to see service to Contra Costa College.
Yeah, I thought so.
Okay, so we got our minutes. So this became a big factor, is what we call split service. Right now, let's say BART trains on the Richmond line run every 15 minutes. If you continue to run service from the Richmond station up to Hercules, you can still run every 15-minute trains. If you went with alternative 7A, you'd have, once you got to the Del Norte station, the trains split. Not the trains, but, one train goes this way, one train goes that way. And so you ended up with 30-minute headways for each of those legs that you've created. There's a very strong case to be made that could create a Civil Rights Act Title VI issue, because you're essentially taking away service from a disadvantaged community in Richmond. So the way you could counter that is if you increase service along the entire BART line, but the cost of doing that was astronomical, and you'll see that our costs are pretty significant as they are. So this was a major determining factor on why our WCTAC board eventually went with the alternative 6, plus the ability to hit up better destinations for stations. We looked at seismic issues and soil stability. Both lines, all 3 of the lines that we looked at would cross the Hayward Fault, which BART already does in other lines. The line coming from Del Norte also crosses an area that's known to have some landslide issues.
So, for seismic references, are you able to anchor in bedrock, or is it going to be in a bad liquefaction zone?
That's a good question. I'm just looking at it here.
I'm guessing they can drill down
Yeah, I mean,
and,
the
and hit
engineers didn't.
bedrock.
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that the engineers that looked at it didn't think that crossing the Hayward Fault was, what do you call it, deal breaker. Thank you.
No, it shouldn't be. It would either break all the way or bend, and the biggest concern would be liquefaction, which would destroy the whole thing.
Yeah, they were pretty confident that wouldn't be an issue, that they could design something that could accommodate crossing the fault. So the other thing we looked at was consistency with local plans. One factor was, Richmond's general plan actually specifically calls for continuing BART through Richmond and not creating making the Richmond station like a cul-de-sac. The alternative 6A with the extension through Richmond is also consistent with BART's expansion policies. It rates a little higher than the other alternative. And one of the nice things about alternative 6 is it can be predominantly can be done within existing right-of-way, but there are still some community impacts in San Pablo. Not that there wouldn't be impacts elsewhere, but to sum it all up here, this just kind of sums up everything that I just went through, but the capital costs at the end and these are preliminary capital costs. You'll see as we went further, the costs have increased, and you'll see the higher costs a little bit later. But, there's a lot more positives that come with the extension from Richmond, and it's a wee bit less expensive. So, whoops, let me get back here. So what would it take to advance a BART extension? A lot more studies. This is just one of the first studies that you would need. There's a lot more that technical analysis that would be required. We would need to be working with BART to get it to, as an agency, to incorporate this into their regional and long-range plans. While we did look at a full extension, and you'll see my last bullet down there, what the cost is for a full extension, we also think that it's worthwhile to consider a one-stop extension, possibly to the college, because there's currently a really high transit suitability. There's a lot of demand up there. The city is very interested in supporting its population, which it has a high transit dependency. So we're looking to see what we can do to find funding to, advance all these, or advance this concept and possibly look into a one-stop extension.
Would that mean just one new station
Yes.
besides going out to Hercules? I mean, one new station along the line would be the college station.
Right. I think, the college participated. They were one of the stakeholders in this. They have an interest in expanding that campus and really developing it. And, it's a big, attractive destination right now. So that's not that easy to get to.
Do that students use BART and then a bus to the campus now?
They probably do. There's a transit center at the edge of the campus, and buses are coming in from all over, and that's roughly where the station could be. So even as we developed this concept of or pursued this concept of extending from Richmond, there's different routes that could be taken there. So there's, like I said, a lot more studies that can still be done. So some of our key findings is that, there's been a long history of study in this corridor, and it's not an easy corridor to make changes into. It's expensive. There's this topography that's challenging. These past studies have really been, I don't want to say sit on. They've been sitting on the shelf, but they have been sitting on the shelf. So one thing that we've really tried to focus on is what we can be doing in the short term to try to make some improvements in this in this corridor. And one of the things we think we need to do is tell the story better. That this I-80 has a regional and a state and even a national importance when it comes to goods and freight movement, and that can open up a lot of funding opportunities for making these improvements. So we think it's a strong candidate for transit investment. We've got a lot of factors that current funders are attracted to. There's a lot of priority development areas in West County, and the cities are interested in transportation-oriented development and developing more housing, affordable housing, increasing job densities. So there's a lot of positive. The other big takeaway that we learned is there's not one single transit improvement that can fix it all. That we can't depend on just a BART extension. That the travel market analysis and the ridership modeling shows that there's sufficient demand to do express bus, to do bus rapid transit, to do a BART extension. That there's this pent-up demand, and the future will bring more demand. So it really needs to be thought of as this transit network. I think that's it, but do you want to see, I think I have a backup slide of where exactly in San Pablo they're looking for the station, at the station. Did you want to see that?
No?
I have a question. We are studying these different transportation systems, but we have never connected the West County with East County. And with 12,000 new homes being produced in Concord by the date of 2040, 2030, I think is our date that we think we'll have all the homes in there right now. But there isn't any connection besides the train between those points. You could take BART over to Concord, North Concord Station, and then have to take a bus to the train. Because Amtrak doesn't run any passenger train along the lines from Antioch and Brentwood. That's all. Well,
Yeah, there's the San Joaquin, we're building a station in Oakley, but they have to get from the BART station over there.
So one of the things that was occurring simultaneously to this plan's development was the CCTA was working on the countywide express bus plan, and they showed express buses coming from central Contra Costa County that would then potentially hook up with the express buses that would serve West County. So that connection starts to occur. But that was a common statement that we heard from people, is that there's difficulty doing this.
there's no connection.
east.
There's no, and eventually we're going to have that, because even with the refineries in Martinez and refineries in West County, there could be a lot of interaction getting back and forth. And I ride that train all the time to Sacramento. My grandchildren are up there. I take the train up there a lot. It's quicker time-wise. It's an hour and 15 minutes from Martinez to the Sacramento station. I think it's great. I think you sit there, relax, it's just wonderful. And I think we're ignoring each other in a lot of ways with that, because Amtrak, if they had the demand for it, and every time I've been on that train, it's been full. And so we're discounting a form of transportation as a potential, and even when we're talking 2040, they should be included somewhere to see what they think their growth is.
And they were a partner on our study. I didn't go into too much detail on that, but one of the limitations with the service along that existing UP railroad is that UP restricts the number of trains per day that can be used for passenger service along there. So right now, the combination of Capital Corridor and Amtrak and San Joaquin, I think they have one more slot per day left where they can run a train. So Capital Corridor is starting to reach a capacity issue, because we also looked at, well, why not put in longer trains then, right? Just add another car. And we did look at that, but what happens is some of the stations downstream can't accommodate that. And like we kind of just ran into all of these situations where we really needed to get some direction from Capital Corridor about what their desire was in terms of the future for their operations. And they were simultaneously, everybody was planning at the same time we were planning, but they were doing their own long-term corridor study. And I think they finished that, but I don't think the board has taken any action yet.
I know we keep discounting that service, but I'm afraid with the time frame we're looking at, it's going to be a more important player all the time when you look at the uses along that line. And the employment that Concord's going after is a big Amazon depot out there, which results in 5,000 more employees in Concord.
So Roseanne, I have a question for you, and I should know this. I just don't remember. How many homes are planned to be built in that Naval Weapons Station area?
Okay, hold on to your seat.
Oh, I know it's big.
It's 12,000 homes. It's 25% of the existing Concord site, Concord.
So that's going to
add-
severely impact BART.
Yeah, it's going to, I was out in Antioch the other morning, and there went the train, from the San Joaquin. But I think it's a way of getting around that is we've kind of put it on the back burner because we're so busy talking about BART and the other forms of transportation in our little community, but in our community, that we forget that this is a player. And some study should be done about how we can incorporate this over the long term. 2040, that's only 23 years. And a transportation study, that's nothing when you're talking about 30-year plans and city plans like that. I think that something should be done, maybe not in your plan itself, but I would like to see some kind of a comment go back to this, that plans should be made through the CCTA, that this should be looked at exactly what the potential of the traffic should be along the East County to the West County. That's all I have to say.
I'll just make a brief comment on that. Caltrans just a week or two ago released their draft state rail plan, and they actually are looking at that corridor and increasing the number of San Joaquin trains that come all the way in, making it more of a commuter service. So
maybe we ought to look at something like that from them. I mean, to this committee, have something, that plan come to this committee.
I'll see if we can get a presentation.
Thank you.
So also, in looking farther into the future, I think there's one in particular that caught my attention is Cybertrans, which can do a whole lot of things, and I'm hoping that Matt can get somebody to come out and give a demo on that. It's very exciting, and it could relieve a lot of problems. However, we're always behind the 8 ball. Look at Highway 4. It's jam-packed already. And the new eBART is going to be loaded full and at capacity. And with the new Concord Naval Weapons Station building, it's going to be overcome real fast. So are the bus systems. So we got to keep pushing forward all the time.
I presume that using the commuter rail option between East and West County, probably the controlling factor is the segment between Martinez and on into West County. It's my understanding that some of that they're actually looking at triple tracking it to increase capacity.
Yeah, we did look at the triple tracking. What we concluded is that if we were just looking at service in West County, that it didn't seem like a very attractive destination. But where Capital Corridor and Amtrak becomes more desirable are for longer trips. So maybe getting down to Jack London Square. Well, to run at the frequency and to get over this restriction that with the number of train slots that UP has, we started to look at what needed to be done in Alameda County, because there's some significant right-of-way constraints, and when you get down to the Jack London Square area, there's concern about adding more trains when it's already on at surface. And then again, we kind of felt like we were starting to get outside of our planning area. And I think we want to cooperate with those agencies, but we're a small segment of Contra Costa County.
Well, I hope the plan that comes in from the one that we'll get an idea of how this is going to interact, and because in the study that you did, it kind of discounted the rail, and I think by explaining that this is an area that is requiring more research or more study, it would make clear that you've at least addressed it at this stage. In my olden days, I used to do a lot of things that you're doing now, and you need to kind of leave the door open, that this doesn't cover everything, and this is kind of a hangnail. It might become more of a problem if we don't start thinking along those lines.
Yeah. And, another presentation you might be interested in is from Capital Corridor, because they are doing this long-range plan, and I think that, they're going to be a little bit closer to, meeting the needs of the community than what a California-wide plan might accomplish.
I wrote them both down.
Do you have any more questions? Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Who's up next?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you. My name is Tim Hale, the Deputy Executive Director for Projects. So I'm new to CCTA. I started in May and been learning the ropes here at CCTA. I come from Southern California. I'm actually a transplant and from the LA area, grew up in the LA area. And I've been doing transportation for the last 19 years, worked at Caltrans for 6 years, and then was on the private consulting side for 14 years. And was managed the services in Inland Empire, also was the nationwide managed lanes practice leader and did a lot of ITS work. And so naturally came to follow Randy in all his ITS and technology projects. So, and happy to be here to present to you Innovate 680. And Innovate 680 really started with our update to the countywide transportation plan. Through extensive outreach and the development of the plan, congestion on 680 was really identified as a priority. And so what the CCTA did is we commissioned a study called the I-680 Transit Relief and Congestion Release and Transit Option Study. And so through that study, developed strategies and projects to address the congestion on 680. And basically, Innovate 680 is really the future of integrated mobility for transportation in Contra Costa County. So these are some of our corridor partnerships. It's a regional project, so it's a regional overall program. And so we plan to engage all of our partners through a policy advisory committee and a technical advisory committee to help guide and develop the process and the projects going through the process. So I think everyone's aware the problem on 680 is really the commuting in and out of Contra Costa County based on the imbalance of jobs and housing in Contra Costa County and the Bay Area. So all of those trips actually end in Contra Costa County. There's very minimal trips that actually go through Contra Costa County. And so what we're doing here is really addressing a Contra Costa problem. So 680 is actually the worst 8th commute in the Bay Area based on the new vital signs, and Leah was actually showing you a little snapshot of that. And the corridor is very transit poor, very lack of physical space. We're not going to be able to go through this corridor and actually do a multi-billion-dollar widening project. And so how do you actually get in here and fix the continued congestion on 680? And in fact, if we don't do anything by 2020, the congestion is going to quadruple and being over an hour and a half commute by 2020. Just a couple years. 2020. Yeah. Yeah. So I think all of you are aware that CCTA has been really investing some key capital improvements along the corridor. The auxiliary lanes was completed through Danville and San Ramon in 2007, 2015. MTC just opened up their express lanes from El Costa to Rudgear. And CCTA will be starting our express lane project, which extends the express lanes in the southbound direction from Rudgear all the way to the Benicia Martinez Bridge. But this is an example that we're not going to be able to really invest too much longer into the corridor. And so, how do you actually solve the congestion here? And we're not going to build ourselves out of congestion. So through our integrated approach, we would maximize the efficiency of I-680 through technology. And actually, this corridor would be the very first, what we're calling the very first connected corridor in the Bay Area. So the goals of Innovate 680 is really to focus on person throughput, share mobility, and mode shift. CCTA, in collaboration with Caltrans and Metropolitan Transportation Commission, has been working on a design alternatives assessment which looked at 9 alternatives through the corridor. One of those alternatives was further analyzed through a bus-on-shoulder option, and bus-on-shoulder feasibility study was completed, as well as a ramp metering feasibility study was completed along the corridor. And so through those 3 reports, these 7 strategies were developed. So I think everyone realizes that weaving causes congestion. And so through those studies, we identified 2 critical bottlenecks in the corridor, one at Livorno Road, and also one at North Main Street. And so in this particular location, this is Lawrence Way and Treat Boulevard and North Main Street. So in the northbound direction, I think everyone realizes that traffic is just dumped on 680 at Lawrence Way, and so that's not providing a lot of opportunity to getting onto the freeway, safely merging onto the freeway. And so by actually using a concept like this and braiding the ramps, you'll be able to eliminate that weave and minimize congestion. So this is just one of the concepts we're looking at. We're also looking at what's called a collector-distributor road concept as well. So to complement the overall express lane work in the corridor, we want to complete the southbound express lane project and extend the express lanes in the northbound direction all the way to Benicia Martinez Bridge. And what that'll do is complete the express lane network in Contra Costa County. That'll also solve the HOV gap at the 24 and 680 interchange. So I think everyone realizes that transit is the most efficient way to move people through the corridor. So we need to make transit a more attractive option to travelers. And so to meet our goal of mode shift, we need to provide reliable and effective transit services in the corridor. So right now we're only operating 1 to 2 buses per hour in the corridor, so we want to increase that by 5 or 6 buses per hour to increase that reliability and efficiency in the corridor. So one of the concepts is buses on shoulder. And so by utilizing the shoulder for bus operations, it does a couple things. One does, it removes or moves the buses out of the express lanes and also the freeway lanes, which actually helps provide additional capacity. That also minimizes congestion because now you don't have the express buses in the express lanes weaving across all of those lanes. And so the buses in the shoulders can now reliably move through the corridor and actually get through the corridor more efficiently. So what we would do is the buses would only operate in the shoulder during peak periods at 30 miles an hour or less. We would have dedicated areas for enforcement and emergency access. And we would also have technology in the buses, so the buses will be aware of any incidences in the shoulder, any conflict with oncoming on-ramp traffic, and so also have lane-keeping technology. And so that the idea is to bring in technology to the bus to make sure it's also safe for the bus driver and also for the adjacent cars.
So how are you going to address an accident or a breakdown where a vehicle, private citizen, has to pull off into that lane and they have no choice? How is that going to be addressed?
So buses on shoulders are actually a very proven approach throughout the United States. So Minnesota DOT kind of paved the path forward. They actually have over 300 lane miles of bus-on-shoulder operations. And because of the buses are actually traveling at only 30 miles an hour, and in some cases, the guidelines actually say the buses can't travel any more than 10 mile an hour faster than the adjacent lane. So if the adjacent lane is, I'll say, dead stop and congestion, the buses would actually see the stranded car in the shoulder, and there's videos of this on Minnesota DOT's website, but they would just safely merge into the adjacent slow lane, and then they would merge back into the shoulder. And if you see the video, it's actually very, very impressive. They do it very, very smoothly, and it really doesn't affect too much of the congestion on the corridor because the corridor is already congested. So the next strategy is actually one of the core components of the overall program. And this is innovative operational strategy. So this is bringing in next generation integrated corridor management. And this was actually probably 2 generations beyond what has been put in the I-80 Smart Corridor. And what this does is actually collects refined data every 30 seconds on the corridor. It analyzes that data, and then the data is actually pumped back into the system to retime the system so that way the cars are moving more efficiently. The other aspect of the system is smart. So the system can actually start learning and start being predictive. So the system will be able to analyze historical data that's aggregated over multiple days, over months, and actually time and react in a much more proactive way to respond to traffic conditions on the 680. The other component to this is a brand new generation of ramp metering. Again, probably I would say a 3rd generation of ramp metering. Most of the ramp metering in the Bay Area is actually a 1st generation ramp metering. 2nd generation ramp metering is typically called adaptive ramp metering. And this is what we're calling coordinated adaptive ramp metering. And so what happens here is that the ramps are able to communicate to each other downstream and upstream, and also hold, for example, if you had a ramp, say you were 2 ramps downstream, that ramp particularly only had 2 cars in the queue, and say you had another Lawrence Way on-ramp, you have 6 cars or 8 cars. So the system would be smart enough to actually hold red of the ramp with only 2 cars, so that way it can clear the queue at the Lawrence Way on-ramp. So the system is smart enough to react to real-time conditions and also minimize queuing and back up onto local roads.
Quick question. Looking at the slide and the bus on shoulder, would you also have a feature where an approaching bus would do a temporary hold on all lanes on the on-ramp so that there wouldn't be a conflict?
Yeah, you're actually beating me on my next slide, but we would have communication between the buses and the ramp metering, so that way their buses would know that the ramp meter would know a bus is oncoming and would hold red at the ramp metering, so that way it allows the bus to traverse through the ramp safely.
Dovetailing on that, what about emergency vehicles?
Same thing. So our goal here is not only do we want to have emergency vehicles, but we also want to have anything related to incident management as well. So we'd actually have technology in the buses, tow trucks, CHP. So we want to make sure that that shoulder is being used and protected for incidents, because if we can clear incidences off the corridor efficiently, then that'll also improve congestion in the corridor. So a similar approach was actually used in Australia. So this approach hasn't been used in the United States yet. However, I'm understanding that they're deploying some similar technologies in Colorado next year. But right now, Australia has the only proven approach where they were actually able, they didn't widen the freeway on M1, and just by managing congestion more efficiently through ramp metering and integrated corridor management, they were able to get an additional 20% capacity out of the corridor, which essentially was a whole nother lane, without even widening the freeway.
What about center lane on and off ramps?
Are you talking about dedicated ramp into the express lanes? So we're not looking at any dedicated ramps into the express lanes as part of this project. So this project, the overall program is not necessarily to look at large infrastructure improvements, because obviously there's a lack of funding. But what we're looking at is how do we manage the corridor efficiently using technology and other approaches. So this next slide here is preparing the corridor for the future. So I think everyone realizes that what the future holds for us is technology and communication between vehicles and communication to vehicles and the infrastructure. So we want to prepare the corridor for the future and actually bring in dedicated short-range communication. And we already discussed this, but the benefit of that is that the bus would be able to communicate to the ramp meter. One unique thing about this overall program is that we're not only just focusing on the freeway. What we also want to focus is getting people to and from the freeway, both to BART, park and rides, and employment centers along the corridor. So we're actually looking at off-system improvements and efficiencies such as Bollinger Canyon, Sycamore Valley, Ignacio Boulevard, Ignacio Valley Road along the corridor, and that way we get more efficient traveling to and from the corridor. The whole goal of this is to be able to increase ridership. So I think everyone realizes that sometimes, transit is not convenient. And so to make it more convenient, we need to increase the first and last mile connectivity. And we want to do that through mobility on demand, shared autonomous vehicle, and also Contra Costa County Public Works is actually looking at studying shared autonomous vehicles on the Iron Horse Trail as well as a bike expressway. So to really encourage that mode shift that we're looking for as part of the project, we want to be able to provide data to all of our travelers so that way they can make the most effective, cost-effective, efficient choice of mode of transportation in the corridor. And so by using technology in the corridor and starting to collect all this refined data on the corridor, we not only want to use that data to refine and make the system operate more efficiently, but we want to bring that data back to the user. So that way the user will know how, based on their mode of transportation of choice. So we would be looking at what is going to be the travel time savings and cost to travel in your car, travel to BART, travel in transit, ride sharing, car sharing, etc. And so based on your commute, your origin and destination, you'll be able to get a platform of mobility options, and based on those mobility options, you'll be able to see what is the most cost-effective, efficient mode of that particular day for your commute. So this really helps us with two things. One, provides an opportunity to move people out of their cars, but by aggregating this data every single day, it helps us understand what is the most prevalent mode that's being used that day. And so it helps us start understanding how many people are traveling by car, how many people are traveling by transit, and what that helps us do is it understands which modes we need to incentivize to get people out of their cars, because we're not looking to push more cars down 680. We want to get people out of their cars and change their travel behaviors. So the Innovate 680 program has multimodal benefits. So through our studies, we're able to realize a 70% in travel time reduction and also increase travel speeds in the corridor. And because now we're providing that reliable transit in the corridor, we're able to realize a 13-minute travel time savings to express bus, because they're no longer operating in that congested express lane. And also because we're able to move those buses into the shoulders, and we don't have all that weaving that's occurring from the express lanes to the ramps, the single occupant vehicles and the high occupant vehicles also realize a travel time savings. And so preparing the corridor for the future for autonomous and connected vehicles and deployment of the shared autonomous vehicle to help with that first and last mile connectivity will result in safer roads, less congestion, and improved air quality. So as a congestion management agency, our goal in terms of managing transportation is to get people and improve reliability to goods, services, and jobs. And so that's one of our main goals with this corridor, is make sure that we're able to equitably make sure people are able to get to where they need to go. So how do we get there? How do we deliver the very first connected corridor in the Bay Area? So we've talked about these 7 strategies. So these 7 strategies were then molded into these 4 projects. And so the Advanced Technology Project would include the integrated corridor management, the next generation ramp metering, the Mobility as a Service app that we talked about, and also the deployment of the shared autonomous vehicle and dedicated short-range communication systems on the freeway. The transit improvements is a real key component to our mode shift because, we want to provide better service for transit. We also want to improve parking rides and also construct share mobility hubs along the corridor. The Express Lane project would extend the express lanes and also address those bottlenecks that we talked about. And then the Bus on Shoulder project would improve the shoulder, improve drainage systems along the corridor, which actually is a very cost-effective improvement. Based on our study, that particular project is only going to cost $7 million. So it's a really, in terms of a cost-to-benefit ratio, it's a pretty big deal. So our overall project schedules, we want to expand the Express Lane network in 2018 to 2020, and that's our southbound Express Lane project that will be starting next year. And then we want to complete the Express Lane network, implement the Bus on Shoulders, and also deploy all our advanced technologies in the corridor over the next 5 years. And then by the year 2025, we want to implement and solve those bottlenecks along the corridor. So we just recently got a strategic plan amendment approved by SWAT, TransPAC, and the Authority Board last Wednesday. And so what that does is program $40 million to the overall project, to the program for these 4 projects. And so we want the overall program is a $300 million investment into the corridor, and so we need to be able to use that $40 million to leverage state and federal funding. So we're anticipating that $40 million will be able to fund planning and environmental for all of the 4 projects, which would help us qualify for other funds such as the SB1 Congested Corridor Program. So I really appreciate the opportunity for being here and happy to take any questions.
Where's the $40 million coming from?
So the $40 million in the expenditure plan, there's an I-680 category, and so that $40 million comes out of the reserves. And so if you look at the table up here, we have I-680 Corridor Reserve Central County, I-680 Corridor Reserve Southwest County, and then the I-680 Bollinger Canyon Road operational analysis. So all of these are all, except for the Bollinger Canyon Road operational analysis, the other 2 categories were reserve funding. Any other questions?
I know it's too soon to tell. But the Express Lane just opened a couple weeks ago, and how are we measuring whether it's working or not?
Well, that project is being led and operated by MTC. And based on my understanding, there are some performance measures that are being measured through the corridor. They were looking at travel time savings. They're looking at violations, looking at travel speeds as well through the corridor. So that it's being measured. So I don't know if there's an actual report that'll be actually put out there, but I know that they're actually doing some monitoring of the system.
Any other comments, questions?
Well, I guess I'll keep the tradition going. I think we never end a meeting without us asking for a tour of Momentum Station. So I don't see it in the minutes, so maybe it'll happen one day. But
Okay, so I was talking to Randy about that, and so he told me that we can just pick a date and get it on the calendar that works for everyone. And then Randy and I will escort you all out to Momentum Station and give you a tour. So we just have to pick a date that works for everyone, and we will make it happen. Now, 2 things. One is we'll have to get you approved to get on the site. The second thing is that we'll also need everyone to sign off on a waiver as well. So, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Are there any reports?
Yep. So I have my report covering the last two authority board meetings. I won't talk about them a great deal. I guess the real focus of the September 20th meeting was getting out the CTP officially out. And on the October 18th meeting, I'll certainly be open to questions. One major thing did come up. Normally, the legislative update is part of the consent calendar. It was pulled because a very serious situation has arisen. MTC staff proposed a new program to link access to state transportation improvement program funding with housing production. And naturally, this would have a very negative effect on Contra Costa County. Our representatives to MTC, can count votes, and they feel the vote on this would be very close. At least they felt that that would be the situation as of the authority board meeting last week. What this would mean is that if this program was put into effect, things like the I-680, 680 Highway 4 interchange work would not be eligible for state funding until Concord was showing considerable improvement on their affordable housing. I mean, everybody is coming up short, especially in the affordable housing areas.
We're planning 25% of the 12,000 homes to be affordable. And that will be probably the first push of the first phase. I don't know how many exactly homes are in the first phase, but I can get that information. And it's a project that's going to be built over the next 12, 15 years. So 25% of that is a very large amount of which we have committed to.
And that would certainly help. But of course, it's not just a Concord problem. Any serious funding down 680 would, be conditioned on how Danville and San Ramon were doing on their affordable housing. And Highway 24, west of Walnut Creek, you would be dealing with Lafayette and Orinda and Moraga. Hopefully you have more to say on it.
So I have a quick update on that. Oh, this microphone is a little more sensitive. So last week at our board meeting, we actually talked about this the STIP housing linkage that MTC is proposing. And our board directed staff to develop a letter to basically oppose the linkage of STIP funding to affordable housing. And so based on staff analysis, at least current today, the STIP housing actually looks at low and medium and high affordable housing. And based on our numbers, City of Concord was at a 13% of their overall target, and then also Martinez was 9% of their overall target. All the other communities in Contra Costa actually were meeting the 15% target that MTC was proposing as part of their Category 1 option. And so that item was actually discussed at today's MTC commission meeting. And unfortunately, I don't know the results of that meeting, but I do know that at the planning and programming meeting a few weeks ago, I think it was October 11th, there was actually a split vote on that item, and it actually was it was decided to move it forward to commission. So I'm not sure what happened at today's meeting, but I know that yesterday we sent this letter to Steve Heminger opposing this idea of linking housing with STIP funding. What we do know is that MTC is actually proposing 3 options. One is, they call it the carrot and stick option, which is basically meeting this 15% threshold. The The second option would be a corridor average approach. And so based on that corridor averaging approach, all cities in Contra Costa County would be eligible for their STIP funding. And then the third option was to essentially just postpone it and not have it part of the 2018 STIP and actually discuss it as part of the 2020 STIP. And so if it does pass, what that will do is it'll affect 2018 STIP funding for the 684 interchange. And so the 684 interchange, we have $18.8 million of STIP funding proposed for that project. And then we also have $4.7 million for the SR4 operational improvement project that goes from 242 to Bailey Road. And those funds would be used for design for the SR4 operational improvement project. So I'm curious to see what happened at today's meeting myself, but I just want to provide that update.
Thank you. One thing I might mention is at the meeting last week, under correspondence, there was a letter that I think was from the U.S. DOT, granted permission to test the driverless shuttle vehicles in a full autonomous mode within Bishop Ranch. So that's another step forward on shared autonomous vehicle testing and deployment. And I'm open for any questions.
I just want to add on that. So autonomous vehicles are actually very close and dear to our heart here at CCTA. And so the shared autonomous vehicle pilot program is going very, very well. We're in phase 1 of that. We're testing it on private parking lots at Bishop Ranch. So the exception that we actually got is from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And that exception is actually the very first of its kind in the United States to operate a Class 4 autonomous vehicle, so no steering wheel, no brake pedal, no gas pedal, on public roads, so test it on public roads. And so the schedule for that project, that initiative, is the next step is to get our permit from DMV, which is in process right now. We're working with City of San Ramon staff on the proposed route, also working with the police department so that way they understand how to deal with the vehicle if something happened out on the road. And we're planning on deploying the vehicle on public roads early next year. And so that phase 2 component will be a one-year testing schedule on public roads. And then from there, our plan is to start deploying the shared autonomous vehicle in 2019.
I have a question for you before you run off, and you may or may not have the answer. Is there a projection concerning how many all-electric vehicles will be deployed over a period of time? And secondly, what percentage of that, or is there a separate projection on the use of autonomous vehicles, single occupancy or something to that effect?
So I do know that our countywide transportation plan that we just completed did assume a level of deployment of electric vehicles in the county. I don't know the exact percent penetration that it actually assumed, but it did assume that there was going to be an extensive use of electric vehicles. I do know that to be able to meet the governor's order to decrease emissions down by I believe it's the 1995 levels of emissions by the year 2050, that there has to be a huge turnover of fleet to electric vehicles, and that percentage, from what I understand, is close to 80%. So we have to assume that high percentage of electric vehicles. In terms of autonomous vehicles, I don't know the exact percentage that we would assume of autonomous vehicles in our overall model. We'll be updating our model sometime next year, so that's Matt's department.
I'll just note that I saw an interesting presentation last week where they studied in Minnesota taking a full lane for autonomous vehicles And it wasn't until you got to about 30 to 40% of all vehicles being autonomous till that lane made sense. Below 30%, there weren't enough cars to actually use the lane. So it does take some pretty high penetration before you get, the positive effects from both electric vehicles and autonomous. But that's what we're here to do, to kind of push that forward. So, are you done, Stephen, with your presentation? With your report? Yeah. Okay. I just had a few staff comments. When you get staff members in the room, you can get all kinds of questions answered. So I'd like to thank Tim for coming tonight, and maybe we'll get him back in the future for another presentation. But just a few housekeeping items I've got for you. Oh, you shut down my item. So one thing we have going on right now is I'll start with some other stuff. Ethics training. You're all required to take the online ethics training course every 2 years. So Fifi, I think, sent something out a couple weeks ago. She'll send a reminder out with the website. It takes an hour or so to complete. You can't fail it. Looks like it went out on the 27th of last month. So yeah, just take a look. If you haven't taken it in the last 2 years, please take it and send Fifi your confirmation.
I have heard you have to be careful not to complete it in under 2 hours.
It won't let you complete it in under 2 hours.
It'll send you to some additional training.
Yeah, more
Yeah,
questions.
so I just answered a question, wandered off, did some other stuff, came back.
There you go. Do some vacuuming or something. And also, since we're here, I've got most of you here. We normally just send an e-copy of the agenda out, but we do send printed hard copies if you'd prefer one. So either let us know now. If you want a hard copy mailed to you, raise your hand, or send Fifi an email before next month. So, Roseanne. Okay. And I got all the way up to there. Anybody over here? Okay. Did you get everybody? Okay. Okay, and no, I mean, especially when it's checklist season, it's important to get those as early as possible and, have an easy to read format. So what I wanted to show you here was we're updating our countywide bike and pedestrian plan. And I just wanted to show you this website because it's live right now. It's at keepcontracostamoving.net, which is a website we use for lots of different public outreach. If you're at all interested in biking or walking or have opinions about it, please go visit this website. There's a survey that basically you can do a survey, you can not do a survey, you can do the interactive map, you can do whatever you want. But the survey is going to ask you, about your biking activity, where you go, kind of what type of rides you take, if you're, how often, that type of stuff. The interactive map.
Well, I got a question for you right now. There's been a lot of questions about Kirker Pass, and with the new Naval Weapons Station development, is there a pathway or a way that what is it? I forget what class trail it is, a bike trail to be put between Antioch, Pittsburgh, and the Naval Weapons Station, separate from the road.
As part of the Naval Weapons Station development, and Roseanne might know this better than I, but I believe there is a path that will go on the south side of State Route 4 that will connect kind of Willow Pass.
Yeah, it'll come down from kind of it's kind of, I consider it north, but it's more like northeast of the development. The East Bay Regional Parks will be there. And the existing roads on the project are going to be resurfaced with just gravel from the destruction of one of those bomb things called bunkers. And so there will be paths right now. There isn't anything from Bailey specifically, but there'll be a lot of roads when it gets over from Bailey to Ignacio.
Well, are these going to be off the main roads, separate?
Yes. And then the development itself will have bike lanes, the preferred bike lanes, through what we are now calling Madonna's Way, in the middle of. Have you had a presentation on that yet?
You know, if it was a long time ago. That I think that's another good future.
I think we
topic.
should, because we're getting close. We're working with the developer on laying out the streets and things, and so it might be good to see. And Lennar is I think we're going to be happy with the product, which took us forever to get. But they've done a beautiful job over at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And Mare Island, I think, is another one that they did. It's going to be very interesting, and it's very much geared to societies we wanted to see. We want a lot of bike. We've got a mobile kind of bus that takes you from one end of the development back to the North Concord BART station, so people can bus over there. There's going to be more parking at the BART station there, proposed by BART. What else can I really tell you about transportation in that area? Oh, well, it's not transportation, but it's going to be a complete solar project, too. All the houses will have solar on them. So it's getting to be kind of a classy action. We're pleased. I'm on the advisory committee for that, and I've been with that project for 12 years. I have. Thank you. Oh, so ask me anything, and if I don't have the answer, I'll give it to you. I'll find out for you.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good presentation topic.
Okay.
So we'll work with you to get them in here.
Okay.
And so something you could do with this interactive part of this website is you can go, say, to the Naval Weapons Station area and you have all these different symbols you can drop down and say, this is a good place for biking, this is a good place for walking, this is a bad place for biking, this is the problem, this is where there's a gap in the system. So there's all these different things you can just kind of plunk down, draw a line. Anyway, you'll figure it out once you get on there. But it's an interactive website, so you can go down to your neighborhood, say, this is where the sidewalks are bad, this is where there needs to be a bike lane, things like that. That'll help inform our bike plan. And then when our bike plan is takes all this information and is published in draft mode, we'll come in. That'll probably be around February or March and present the bike and ped plan to you guys. So, and then as far as tours, Tim covered the Gomentum Station. We now have our own entrance to the station, so it's a little bit easier. You don't have to go through the Navy to get in there. We just have to do the waiver stuff that Tim mentioned. So that's exciting. We can get you in there pretty quick, it sounds like, as long as we come up with a date or two. And then Fifi and Lindsay, our Director of External Affairs, are working on the BART station tour. So we're trying to find some dates that work for them. That's a little more difficult because it's finding dates that work for not just you guys, but for BART as well. So, but we're working on it. So you'll hear from Fifi on that, the tours, and on the ethics training. So that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Do we have any other local reports of what's going on in your town? Anything? Come on, something's got to exciting be happening. So.
Well, in Byron, we have our first stoplight up. Not working yet. It's not working yet, but the light is actually up. Do not come through Byron. The road is closed. All 19,000 cars have to go on hallway, and we look like 680 at commute time. So trust me, you don't want to go through Byron.
I have a very brief update from our traffic manager in the town of Danville, just really quick. Sycamore overcrossing, they're going forward with that to improve traffic flow there. There's also a bike master plan, and as a biker, I was very happy to see that. They're increasing downtown parking. They're adding over 500 spots and adding 116 spaces to the park and ride off Sycamore as well, which is funded by Measure J. Other things on Street Smarts are 23 buses taking more cars off the roads. So some good stuff.
Anybody else? Well, I do know that I'm intimately involved with electric vehicles. I now own 2, and the range anxiety should be coming to an end. I do know that the state has has made agreements with several companies to electrify Interstate 80 from Tahoe all the way to Santa Cruz and I-5 and the 99 corridor. So those projects are happening right now. Currently, the big gap is on I-5 and 99 between Fresno and Bakersfield and then over the hill. But it's happening, and it's happening very, very fast. So, and I'm plugged in downstairs.
What did you say about?
Yeah, I didn't know there was more than one that I could go through, but the exit that you have to go through is down on the basement floor, and you would go out through the staffed, not manned, staffed exit. There's a gate and there's a person in there that will take your ticket, and then you come out by the hotel over here. Yeah.
Yeah, you just go out the main. There's a gate where people with monthly passes can go in and out. Yeah, on the Wayne Drive side, you'll want to go out past the person in the kiosk, and they'll just wave you through. Yeah, yeah.
Huh?
Are we adjourned?
I don't know. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll send out a doodle poll to find everyone's availability, and once we can narrow that down, we'll go from there.
His calendar is wide open.